So I called this presentation "Keeping the Dream Alive" because there are films and political trends that are propagating a nostalgic return to back when we were living the dream. But we were never living the dream. That was always a myth. So I would love to know if and how, theoretically, these films and shows may contribute to the rise of populism. The cultural artifacts that I'll discuss today reinforce the ideology propagated by strongmen leaders and are reciprocated by strong voters, with particular attention paid to the victimhood narrative. So, as we know from this week, trauma narratives are gaining legitimacy through grassroots efforts, social activism films such as Kolbana Saida, and of course, workshops such as these that endeavor to nourish narratives to the point of wider recognition and, in the context of social constructivist cultural trauma theory, social signification. So today it's a little bit about the other side of the coin, in which unexpected groups, such as those who currently benefit from the position of the dominant paradigm, are also articulating victimhood narrative. So let's call them opponents of the hegemonic shift towards inclusion. They're mirroring this call for recognition and the normalization of their plight through mainstream entertainment. So I will. Here we go. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about why this is important. I really should have said why it's important to me, at least. Then a little bit about context of film politics and voting viewers. Then I'll make an attempt at defining the dream. Then I'll offer a methodology of strong men and strong voters. Then I will debut my dream test, and followed by applying it to 3 case studies, and then offering where I hope to take this. So I feel my calling is in the area of praxis, where we connect the arts and the humanities with the wider public. So while we saw yesterday in Yasna's presentation that education is not necessarily an antidote to intractable thinking, it sure doesn't hurt to stimulate analytical thinking in the wider public. And there are many benefits to this, but they're outside of the scope of what I want to address today. So with regard to cultural artifacts, in addition to teaching first-year university students, I also teach film literacy to high school students who have been identified by their schools as having obstacles in their path to third-level education. So the first lesson on the first day that I communicate to them is that all films are cultural artifacts that function both as part of the culture, whether we like them or not, but also as vehicles of culture that can entertain us, like when the world is on lockdown, but also reinforce or challenge existing narratives, hegemonies, and mythologies. Therefore, my stance is, if a movie's been made, it should be acknowledged as an artifact of society. Even the really bad ones communicate that either someone in the voting public wanted to tell a story, thought it was a good idea, or that people would want to watch it and it would be lucrative. I also consider films to be symbols. In light of the populism that's emerged since 2000, or populism 2.000, it behooves us to examine every resource that we have at our fingertips to understand this attraction. So to me, films can sometimes be a bit like expanded versions of the symbolic images that Yasna shared with us yesterday. So films generally are not that heavy-handed, but all films are political, whether intentional or not. Now, the narratives of victimhood, in the examples that I'll discuss today, there are narratives of victimhood that point to a precarity of a way of life, or of relative deprivation, which is distinct from actual deprivation, but I'll come back to this. And these align with the rhetoric promoted by those who subscribe to what Jasna calls the ethos of conflict. So with regard to empathy, I firmly believe that films and other artworks, such as comic books, that are accessible to the wider public can be a tool of empathy. And films, especially because they really cater to our mirror neurons and our hardwiring to identify. Alison Landsberg, in her 2004 text, Prosthetic Memory, describes films as a means of cultivating empathy to those not directly impacted by a situation. She argues that movies about topics such as American slavery, immigration to the US, and Holocaust survival can generate empathy in those of us who came years or generations after, because we're invited to identify with the characters. So this could be a solid means of non-confrontational and private reconciliation. Again, Jasna, I'm an optimist. But on a side note, Chris Rock says he actually hates movies that depict the Black side of the civil rights movement and slavery, because in fact to him, they don't show just really how bad it was for Black people in the US, or scenes captured such as his own mother having to be treated by a vet instead of a doctor because she was Black. So he's never seen that depicted. He acknowledges the importance of those films, but wishes that they would do more. So there's an established and always fascinating field of political science, never a dull moment, especially because what happens in politics can have a deep and lasting impact on our lives, as we are seeing with pandemic politics and backsliding. Then there's film studies. And we learn so much about the psychology of art and human nature through gazing at characters, identifying with them, crushing on them, imitating them. And we can learn from them because when a film is over, we pretty much return to our lives. It's an imaginary place, but very necessary to human development, like Homo ludens. But so far, in the research that I've encountered, and if anyone has any leads on articles that suggest otherwise, the research that I've encountered really bemoans the lack of films in political studies. So I'm going to call this the gap in the knowledge. And we know that there's a little bit more to audience reception theory than monkey see, monkey do. The relationship with the spectator, who believes in the reality of what he's watching, although he doesn't believe in it, is a complex one. I think it was Adorno who talked about that. But so the fact that film is such a presence and is so transparent is proof of the value of using it, including in political theory. And so in politics and film, Laurent Gaumer cites cinematic trends of blaxploitation films and new Black films in the US as decisive forces in broadening the ethnic inclusivity and representation of American politicians. So he says that diversity was made possible by making emancipation a reality on film, particularly through rebellion, heroization, and trivialization when socio-political and artistic constructions could interweave and influence each other and hybridize. So, film has a long history of being a vehicle of propaganda. We know this. We have Walter Benjamin, Aestheticization of Politics, Triumph of the Will by Leni Riefenstahl. And looking back, we're not surprised by films produced, say, during Italy's fascist period or Nazi Germany. Mussolini and Goebbels really orchestrated what the audience consumed. And so the examples I look at today, made after 2000, are produced in allegedly more democratic circumstances. And so I aspire to construct a typology that addresses the ideological function of films with more nuanced than those with story-sized swastika banners and concrete heroes and villains. The ones that were made since 2000 speak to this kind of evolved authoritarianism that we're kind of currently dealing with. And to me, such films and shows are bricks in the road that have paved the way to where we are now. So today, I'm using what I know about politics, films, and ideological function to demonstrate how 3 examples promote this concept of the dream by co-opting the victimhood narrative, among other things, that indicates support for the populist far right, with the hope that, you know, you and others will go forth watching Netflix and chilling as part of your pandemic duty, but also your political responsibility. So I'm really looking at the space, the overlap between politics and TV. I tried to make it clear with the bright golden arrow, but just to be clear. So another way, this is just something that is on my mind. It's what I think about when I'm trying to fall asleep. And I don't have specifics to it yet, and you know, I have high hopes for the feedback that will come out of this, but there's something about myth and mimesis and it being modeled, how we identify with it, and then the extension of self with politics. This is just it's this itch that I need to scratch. So, defining the dream. It's atmospheric, but it's also culture specific, but it revolves around a nostalgia for this pre-inclusive hegemony, or the world that strongmen leaders project. So some of the key words floating around here that have not been pinned down are masculinity, tradition, nostalgia, virility, hero, and these are values and expectations that are not explicit. They're floating signifiers, and I seek the signifieds that articulate at least versions of them. This feels like chasing shadows, but you know, that's kind of the name of the game, especially when we consider film as, you know, Plato's cave. So now I want to turn to how strongmen elicit the dream through their rhetoric. My motivation for this is Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present by Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And you know, after you know, thinking about binary terms, maybe strongman is a little too binary, so we could switch to the more gender-neutral strong bad from Homestar Runner. No? Okay, maybe not. Anyway, these 3 points of utopia, nostalgia, and crisis, drawn from Ruth Ben-Ghiat's latest book. So she argues that strongmen leaders push, you know, or include these 3 points in their campaigns. So they propose a utopia, so a desire for a pristine community. The leader promises to get what the country lacks or feels deprived of. There's an element of nostalgia in which we make X great again. And there's a fantasy with that of returning to when male authority was secure, and women and people of color and workers knew their place. So, and then thirdly, crisis. Responding to political, demographic, and international threats, the strongmen leaders stimulate feelings of humiliation and anxiety while promoting their leadership as a self. So that crisis is really where the victimhood narrative starts to emerge. So this is what strongmen leaders are evoking. And now I want to take a look at how strong voters, you know, respond to this, you know, or what they seek in their elected officials and themselves. So what I did here, I used Thomas Pettigrew's social psychological characteristics of he says it's Trump supporters, but also has enough literature to argue that it's consonant with findings of other far-right supporters in Europe. So Thomas Pettigrew, he's a social political psychologist, and he found that supporters of Trump and voters of comparable far-right politicians share these characteristics. But he was very clear, and I adhere to this too, that the world's exceedingly complex and all social phenomena are multivariate, and we must consider an array of interrelated factors to account for this unprecedented election. He's referring to Trump. Demographic and individual factors that constituted the tinder and the actual igniting factors that lit the fire. But no claim is made that these social psychological factors provide in themselves an explanation. So again, no one aspect of these 5 characteristics explains it all. So, and I'm going to quote his definitions for these things. So he says authoritarianism is a syndrome characterized by deference to authority, aggression towards outgroups, a rigidly hierarchical view of the world, and resistance to new experience. It's typically triggered by threat and fear, and they view the world as a very dangerous place. Social dominance orientation, think alpha male. It's closely related to authoritarianism, but clearly separable. It features an individual's preference for the societal hierarchy of groups and domination over lower status groups. It represents a predisposition towards anti-egalitarianism within and between groups. Those who adhere to SDO are typically dominant, tough-minded, driven, and disagreeable, and they throw around language such as losers and complete disasters when describing lower groups. There's the joint power of authoritarianism and social dominance orientation predict far right-wing voting has been repeatedly found in European research. Belgium, France, Netherlands, Italy. So there's a pattern here. Number 3, prejudice. Pettigrew says many outgroup prejudices characterize dedicated Trump followers, not just anti-immigrants, but anti-outgroups in general. So support for Trump correlates highly with the standard scale of modern racism. In Belgium, prejudice against immigrants was the single most important predictor of support against the far-right Vlaams Bloc party in Flemish Belgium. With regard to number 4, intergroup contact, a major means of reducing intergroup prejudice is through optimal intergroup contact. And racial and ethnic isolation of whites in the US at the zip code level, the postcode level, was one of the strongest predictors of Trump's support. Now, with regard to relative deprivation, this is the one that I'm most fascinated by. Instead of absolute deprivation, social psychologists stress that the importance of relative deprivation. So Trump voters were less likely than other groups to be looking for work, to be unemployed, or to be part-time. And in fact, the voters who were living in districts with more manufacturing were less favorable to Trump. So nor were Trump's followers living in postal code areas where employment had declined. So what this is really saying, what Pettigrew is saying is what voters think is true is more important in elections than the actual truth. So again, Trump adherents feel deprived relative to what they expected to possess at this point in their lives and relative to what they erroneously perceive other less deserving groups to have acquired. So Trump adherents are typically not personally economically destitute but they're feeling deprived relative to their hopes and expectations. And so I just highlighted a bit of, I apologize that the poll is so small, but this is exit polls, and you can see the demographics breakdown. So what I did, now that I have all this free time without a PhD to worry about, I flipped, or I tried to apply both the strongmen narrative that Ruth Ben-Ghiat offered, along with Pettigrew's factors, to try to apply this to mainstream film and television, to kind of construct a bit of a Bechdel test, if you will. So I asked, does a film or show portray rewarding adherence to mythology? So that kind of maps with Pettigrew's authority. Secondly, is there a masculine ideal savior? You know, do we have our alpha male? Is there, are there instances of diminishing the other? So we have our prejudice. Then is there disdain for the newfangled or intergroup contact in which ideas would come and be integrated from the outside? And finally, is there a victimhood narrative or relative deprivation? And my criteria for this is I'm looking at feature-length films or series. They have to have wide distribution and be made after 2000. So the three samples that I have are Clint Eastwood's Gran Torino. Let us admire the shotgun, scowl, the big American vehicle. Kusturica's On the Milky Road. Oh, sorry, in Eastwood, the theme unofficially doesn't appear on the poster, but a guy has to get a job, a car, and a girlfriend. That is how you participate fully in American life, according to that film. Then On the Milky Road, Costa, who is riding the donkey in the background, is a warrior for a Serbian heavenly kingdom, also featuring Monica Bellucci. So, and then with Resurrection Ertugrul, that's a Turkish series. It's about resurrecting the Ottoman Empire. So I'll offer a little bit of quantitative data, or just a little bit of context for the films, and then we'll see how they fared on the test. So Gran Torino, made in 2008. It was directed by Eastwood. Its theme is get a job, get a car, get a girlfriend. It originated or was made in the US. Is the director political? Yes, this has been demonstrated through interviews. Has the country demonstrated a right-wing shift, or a shift towards the right since 2000? Yes. How is the film funded? Privately funded. How is it distributed? It was available in cinema, it's available on DVD, and it's available on YouTube for rent. Has it received any acclaim? Yes. Gran Torino had 22 wins and a further 22 nominations. And according to IMDb, and I fully recognize the subjectivity of IMDb, but it received a score of 8.1 out of 10, based on 731,000 user reviews. Now, obviously, Serbia being a smaller country with less reach. On the Milky Road, directed and starring Kusturica, so we still have the director and starring relationship going on there. Again, the theme is warrior of a heavenly kingdom. Country of origin is Serbia. Is the director political? Yes, as evidenced by Kusturica being a personally invited guest to Peter Handke's Nobel Prize ceremony, amongst other things. Has the country experienced, or is it shifting towards the right? Yes. Funded privately. The film was distributed at film festivals, limited release in cinemas, and available on DVDs. It received 3 wins and 2 nominations, and a score of 6.4 out of 10 based on just over 4,000 user reviews. So Earth to Grill series, 2014 to 2019. Bit of context, each season has 75 episodes. It's a commitment. It's a commitment. This is why, like Costa, whenever I do something with my free time, like there's only so much time in a day, so I have to, you know, if I'm watching this and it's absorbing all my other time, I have to marry the, yes.
How many seasons are there? And
5.
5 seasons. And how long does one episode last?
Good question. About 40 to 50 minutes.
Impossible.
The word possible is in impossible. So is the director political? The resurrection of the Ottoman Empire. The country is Turkey. Is the director political? Yes, we know this through much of the creators' social media accounts. Is the country experiencing a right-wing shift? Yes. The funding, I say here that it's public. It screams on the national television station TRT1 that I am under the impression that it has kind of a TV licensing taxation situation. I need to do more research into this, but I venture that the series is funded by public taxes. It's available on Netflix, and in case you missed it, all episodes are available for free on YouTube. It's received 16 wins and a further 9 nominations, and a score of 8 out of 10 based on 30,000 views. Fun fact about Turkey I did not know is that after the US, it generates the second most amount of content that's distributed worldwide. I really thought the telenovelas had that locked down, but every day's a school day. So we're going to turn to the case studies now, look at them individually. I'm going to offer just a few headlines to provide a bit of context, given the internationalism that internationalism that we have in this room. I don't expect anyone to know any one country in depth. So in U.S. headlines, we have Clint Eastwood defending Donald Trump and says we're living in the generation. Oh wait, we're all grown up, so we're living in the pussy generation. So he said this in August, just before the election. Yeah, that was the thing. Then we have 2 headlines courtesy of a congresswoman from Georgia who's co-opting the victimhood narrative. Marjorie Taylor Greene compared Black Lives Matter to the KKK. So there's that. She says Black Lives Matter has become the most powerful domestic terrorist organization within the United States. Okay. Then she says Marjorie Taylor Greene compared a mask mandate to the Holocaust. She was specifically speaking about House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's refusal to lift a mask mandate in the House, in which Republicans have increasingly complained about, and I'm quoting from the article, even though less than half of their members have been vaccinated. Greene calls Nancy Pelosi mentally ill, and she says, we can look back in time when people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens. So much so that they were put on trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany, and this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about. Again, Nancy Pelosi saying, if you're not vaccinated, please wear a mask. So there's a lot of co-opting of a victimhood narrative. So trauma narratives are gaining legitimacy through grassroots efforts, social activism, all this, and these are being co-opted. And this is problematic. So looking at the film briefly, Gran Torino is about an immigrant family that moves next door to Clint Eastwood, and he takes on begrudgingly with his scowl that he probably has insured. He is their protector, but also their indoctrinator into American culture. My impression is that the preferred reading is to see the film as integrationist rather than colonial or assimilationist, but for me, this is problematic. So again, applying my dream test, is there a reward for adherence to mythology? Absolutely, because apology, spoiler alert, Clint Eastwood bequeaths the Hmong neighbor Tao with his job, a girl, and a car. Masculine ideal savior, it's Clint Eastwood holding a shotgun, saying, "Get off my lawn." So, yes. He preserves his role as a violent arbiter, a gun-wielding homeowner who must defend his property and apparently next door from invasion. When there's intra-group conflict, Eastwood is the hero who is the only one who can stop it. Is there a instance of diminishing the other? Absolutely. Telling a joke at a bar, Clint Eastwood says, a Mexican, a Jew, and a colored guy walk into a bar. The bartender looks up and says, "Get the fuck out of here." So there's that. There's also someone put together a compilation on YouTube of all the racial slurs and swears that are used in the film. There's also a disdain for the newfangled, in which Clint Eastwood, who is really disdainful of how his own children and grandchildren have availed of the conveniences of modern American capitalist culture, and he's really put off that his kids would buy, non-American made cars. We have a bit of emotional attachment to objects in there. But at one point, Clint Eastwood says, "I have more in common with these ooks than I do with my own family." So, and then number 5, the victimhood narrative. Clint, or Walski in this case, really perceives himself to be deprived because of this white flight from Detroit that has now made space for the same people, to his mind, that he went to war against as a Korean War soldier, are the same people who are encroaching on his lawn and invading on his way of life. So now turning to the second case study, 3 samples from Serbian headlines. The Guardian reported that Imre Kusturica said, "Khan rejected my film because I support Putin." Okay? Balkan Insight, and there's an asterisk next to that because at least one of the workshop participants here is a Balkan Insight journalist. So excluding those who already know who it is, I will buy a pint for whoever uses their own investigative journalist skills to figure out who it is. They say Serbia's right-wing shift risks fueling extremism, and Danas reported Demostat study says that 44% of respondents do not follow recommendations for protection against the virus. And to our delegates from Serbia, thank you for being vaccinated. Really appreciate it. Thank you for not being part of the 44%. And I appreciate the hypocrisy as the only person in the room who's not yet vaccinated, but I really want to be. So, what they said, no, I'll skip that. So the dream test and on the Milky Road. According to Monica Bellucci on Ivan Ivanovic, not a political film. Again, I find this reading problematic. This film is about the tale of Costa, the milkman, in this distant spatio-temporality that we can call frozen in time. And the village is besieged by everyone, throughout the film, from the Austro-Hungarians to the Ustasha to the UN to British Special Forces on a private mission. But Costa takes this into stride, knowing that making sacrifices for the heavenly kingdom is a part of the Serb identity. So Do we have rewards for adhering to mythology? Yeah. Heavenly Kingdom is really a part of the scene. Do we have a masculine ideal savior? Absolutely. We have the Balkan warrior as described by Ivan Cholovic. Do we have diminishment of the other? Yes. He really, one example is when the British soldiers are hunting Monica Bellucci, he has them watching Tom and Jerry cartoons, which, just demonstrates that they're thoughtless. Do we have disdain for the newfangled? Yes. He's, at one with nature. There he is feeding a bear. So there's that. Do we have victimhood narrative? Yes. Under siege. Then I'm conscious of time. I'd rather be short and sweet than overstay my welcome. So in Turkish headlines, Transition says, the big story is a new mosque opens on Taksim Square on a significant date. So the mosque is located in a very secular public space. The building features a 30-meter high dome and combines an Ottoman and contemporary arch. It can accommodate 4,000 people and is visible from almost anywhere in Istanbul, according to Deutsche Welle. And this is still in transition. Taksim Square now occupies a prominent place among the symbols of Istanbul, and President Erdogan said after Friday prayers at the site, God willing, it will stay here to the end of time. BT Dubs, Erdogan is a devout Muslim who's really pushing for a larger role for Islam in Turkish society. So, second headline, Biden rebukes Turkey after it quits accord protecting women. Which accord? The Istanbul Accord. So, there's that. Rights groups accuse Erdogan, this is from the article, of taking mostly Muslim but official secular Turkey on an increasingly socially conservative course during his 18 years in power. After a spectacular Pride March in Istanbul, which drew 100,000 people in 2014, the government responded by banning future events in the city, claiming to have security concerns. So we can see which way the wind is blowing. And then I have a quote from, or a headline from Daily Sabah, which says, Turkey's health teams are on a mission to convince vaccine skeptics. I flipped through some of the other headlines and did the whole About Us and small wikifari about this. Daily Sabah's parent corporation is funded by the same political party as Erdogan. So there's that. A bit about Resurrection Ertugrul. Do you like sword fights? Do you like horses? This is the show for you. It's been called the Turkish Game of Thrones, and it revolves around Ertugrul, the father of the founder of the Turkish Empire, Osman, in the 13th century. Very popular show. One headline said that a Mexican couple has converted to Islam after watching it. So again, I know reception theory, is more complicated than monkey see, monkey do, but I think that's a good example of the power of, visual imagery. Other people have commented that it's nice to see the phrase Allahu Akbar associated positively rather than negatively, as it has been so consistently in Western media. Like with Western media, it's often, the next sequence involves something getting blown up, and there's a lot more to it than that. It's really popular in Pakistan. However, it's banned in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, who are quite comfortable with the present Turkish borders right where they are. So, does it reward adherence to mythology? Yeah. The show is called Resurrecting Ertugrul, Resurrecting the Ottoman Empire. Is there a masculine ideal savior? Swashbuckling and devout Ertugrul. Is there diminishing the other? I'm not sure if you can quite see it, but looming in the background there is a crusader. And it was a real treat for me to get a different perspective. Like, no, crusaders are not the good guys. I was comfortable with that before the show introduced it, but the other in this case are the evil crusaders, complete with their own Gregorian chant, musical cue, and anyone who collaborates with them. Is there disdain for the newfangled? I mean, it's set in the 13th century. So, yes. Is there a victimhood narrative? Yes, the show revolves around picking up the tent and moving the tribe due to forced migrations and grief. So, what I'd like to do with this, is I'd love to test my hypothesis, my dream test. Absolutely, I need to widen the sample size. So please send me recommendations of films, shows, anything made after 2000, no matter the language, no matter the location. I'm all ear, eyes. I'd like to create a list of films and proceed to amass data about box office figures, back when we could go to the box office, and viewership. This would allow me to gauge the habits of audiences who view films that function ideologically and the studios that produce them. And with this information, I hope to develop a better understanding of the triangle that I showed you before of the relationship between myth and mimesis, identification, and politics. But I am realistic. After all, as Thomas Love said yesterday, we are academics and we cannot claim to be useful. But I am interested in Nadesh Latu's Power of Myth Reloaded, again, Alison Landsberg's Prosthetic Memory. This is not, to be clear, I'm not trying to say these films should be canceled or anything, but I think we should take into account what's on our horizon. And after Nebusha made the announcement about Warholm Restaurant, I found that gem. And I just wanted to say that no matter what you choose to eat tonight, it does not have bearing on your masculinity, despite what real American men and the war on meat say. Thank you very much.